Morning,
Good
sir.
morning, everyone, and welcome to
Morning.
the 39th monthly talk of the Rail Enthusiast Society. Today, we have a topic which is quite different from the topics we have had till now, and that is we'll be talking about a specific railway, the Swiss railways of Europe. And the speaker is Mr. Manikandan Venketaramanan. His name is a bit of a tongue twister for us North Indians, so I think I'll refer to him as Mani. Incidentally, Mani has already delivered one lecture before, but I would like to introduce him for those who may not have heard any of his previous lectures. He is a finance and risk management professional who has obtained his Chartered Financial Analyst and Financial Risk Manager Charter. He did his MS in Finance from the University of Pittsburgh. He currently serves as a senior consultant in one of the big four American consulting firms. Of course, above all, he's an avid rail fan and an active and passionate member of the Rail Enthusiast Society. He is interested in reading about the past and the present of railroading, its operations and technology. He serves as the director of the UK-based WATTRAIN. WATTRAIN stands for World Alliance of Tourist Trains and Trams and Trains, where he represents India and provides information and ideas to fellow directors. He is also a member of the UK-based Advanced Steam Traction Trust. He connects and liaises with various railroad associations in the USA. This is going to be his second talk. Therefore, I will not keep you from the talk, and I hand over to Mr. Mani. Over to you.
Thank you very much, JL Saab, and thank you so much for the kind introduction, and thanks everyone for sparing an hour on a weekend to come and attend this lecture. So let me just give you a short introduction or context as to what this is about. So this is about an introduction to the Swiss railway network. So as you know, the seeds for this particular topic was laid by an earlier lecture which was delivered by Mr. Anamitro, where he had covered a bird's eye view of the railway systems in North America, Europe, Japan, China, and of course, how it's applicable in the Indian context. So when myself and Mr. Singh were having a discussion as to what can be the next topic be, we thought since we had a macro view of what is happening in the world, we can just zoom down and go into a micro level, taking just one country. Anyway, so this talk, I would like to mention here would be delivered in two parts. Today, we will only have a very broad overview of the Swiss railway network. So let me just begin screen sharing. First of all, I'll also like to tell you that the target here is to cover around 40-45 minutes, having around 10-15 minutes of discussion and questions about the Swiss railway. Primarily considering the nature of data that was available and how I went about collecting data for this, and I'll tell you at the end what was the adventures and misadventures I faced in collecting something about a continental railway network which is primarily Germanic speaking, so it's a little bit more difficult to collect information about this, but we'll come to that. But let me begin my screen share, and I would also like to keep this a little bit of a conversational approach, right? All right. Let me know if you can see my screen.
We can see your screen.
Very clear.
Very good.
Thank you. All right. Moving on. Anyway, before, like since the Germans are a bit particular about everything, they are sticklers for perfection. I'll also like to point out that this particular clock over here is called as a railway clock, and it is offered by multiple Swiss watch makers, even for the wrist. So anyway, so moving on. So this is the agenda. So this is part one, where we'll be covering overview of the Swiss railway system. We'll talk a little bit about history, about the first trains in Switzerland. And of course, Switzerland, the thing which comes to view is mountain railways. And if it's a mountain railway, obviously for increased adhesion, we need rack railway systems. Switzerland, interestingly, has 4 different types of rack railway networks, and all of them were invented in Switzerland itself. So we'll cover a little bit about that, trivia about that. And then Swiss steam locomotives. I know that's a misnomer. Switzerland being one of the first countries to electrify, starting the electrification and also completing around 90% of its main electrification by 1938. No other country had done that, but they did have a significant volume of steam locomotives as well. So that's about Swiss steam. This I intend to cover over two parts. Today, we'll only broadly touch upon one or two locomotives with a detail on the last surviving steam locomotive, which was the last to be withdrawn, and about that. And we will also cover a little bit about the finances and economic impact of the Swiss railway network. And by the way, Swiss railways are profitable. They are one of the few railway networks around the world which is profitable. Of course, they had some downturn during COVID, but they are slowly coming back on track to pre-COVID levels. So we'll talk a little bit about some numbers. Me being a numbers guy, will talk some numbers about some of the two companies, to be more precise, about the finances of them. And then this is about part one. Part two will focus on the elephant in the room, which is Swiss electrification, because if you touch upon Swiss railways, there cannot be anything without touching upon electrification. So part two will cover more about the Swiss railway electrification, the electrification scheme that they adopted, the experiments they made, and also the electric traction they used in the past and what are they using at the present. Then we will cover a little bit about investments made in the railway network since 1960 in Switzerland and future investments, which the plans that they have. And we'll also talk about the so-called private railway companies in Switzerland. And of course, we will end it up in part two with the heritage scene in Switzerland. So that's the structure of the Swiss railway network. So moving on. All right. Okay, so you can see here the primary railway company in Switzerland, which is state-owned, is called SBB, CFF, FFS. Typical Germanic fashion. What are all these alphabet soups, as I term it? So Switzerland, as you know, it comprises of three different sets of people. 63% of the population of Switzerland are Germanic. They are German-speaking. So SBB stands for Schweizerische Bundesbahnen in German, which means the Swiss railway network. And then you also have a little bit of the French and Italian speaking people as well. So for satisfying the French speaking population, it's called CFF, which is Chemin de Fer Fédéral Suisse. So that's for the French speaking. And then you also have around 10 or 12%, if I'm not wrong, 10% of people who speak Italian. So that's mostly in the southern parts of Switzerland, in the Switzerland-Italy border. So that's Ferrovie Federali Svizzere. So that's why the primary railway company is called SBB, CFF, and FFS. And just a little bit about the country itself. The country is just 225 kilometers, 140 miles from north to south, and 350 kilometers from west to east. So it's hardly the size of a single state in India. But why we are actually covering about them is that the density of network over there, right? And then the way they operate, the interlinkage which they have with multiple other transportation systems and also with the private railway operators is impeccable, the way they have done it. And then this has lessons not just in running a railway network, but also in terms of public policy, how they decide in terms of running a railway. So which we will cover across the slides. Yeah, the population of Switzerland is 8.7 million. And then a little bit about the photograph itself. You would know none of these photographs would be available in any of the internet archives anywhere. So all the photographs here are unique because, as I mentioned, I said at the end, I will cover how I was able to collect this much information about a country which is not available on records because it's not English speaking. This photograph belongs to a private photographic collection of Mr. Martin Fisher. So with whom I had the good fortune of connecting, and then he had written a couple of books about Swiss railways, and then he's an active member of the Swiss Railway Society. So he has his own personal photographic collection. That's what this is about. So the picture that you see here, the first locomotive that you see is called the RE 6x6, which we will cover in part 2 about electric railway locomotives. It is a BBB locomotive, where you have two driven axles, but you have three sets of two driven axles. And it's also called the Gotthard locomotive because it's one of the most powerful locomotives to ever been built in Switzerland by the consortium of Brown Boveri Company and the predecessor of Asia, and also by SLM, Squaries J Locomotive Machine and Fabric, SLM, and the same guys who built all our mountain locomotives in India, they also build electric locomotives as well. So these guys built one of the most powerful locomotives in continental Europe, and of course in Switzerland. And then the locomotive behind it is called RE 4x4, which is a standard electric locomotive. So what the Swiss do is they combine, they have a multiple unit operation of these two locomotives, and they call it as RE 10x10. And the Swiss also have a very unique naming system, naming convention. Maybe we can touch it a little bit here, maybe in more detail later on. So alphabets signify the power of the locomotive. And then if you don't have that E attached to the alphabet, it means it's a steam loco. So you will have C, A, B, C, D, E in increasing ascending order of power. So, and then if you have a small E after an alphabet, it means it's an electric locomotive. And then of course, they don't use the white notation, which we use. Say, for instance, a Pacific locomotive is called 462. They don't use it. They actually count the axles, even for steam locomotive. It's the Germanic kind of, and this basically means Germanic notation. This basically means you have 6 driven axles out of total 6. And this means that you have 4 driven axles out of 4. Anyway, the location is, we'll cover this in some time. It's one of the cantons of Switzerland called Uni, if I'm not wrong. And then the city is Sisikon. So that's why it's such a beautiful picture. That's why I think people flock to Switzerland, right? Yeah. So moving on. All right. Again, just to understand a little bit about the geography of the country, Switzerland, the SBB, CFF, FFS, which I spoke about, which is the major railway company owned by the state, it was nationalized in 1902. And then it was a mixture of, in the first map, you can see that these are the constituent companies which merged to form SBB. We'll just refer to it as SBB, the primary railway operator. So, so they all merged together. And why did they merge? It's not because, again, unlike other countries where the nationalization happened because they were concerned about line closures, how private sector would play, or whether they were loss making and all that. That was not the reason. All of these lines were profitable even then. It's because Switzerland had a very unique structure. Till around 1848 or so, the country itself was completely decentralized. So the current approach, which I would refer as Switzerland, is maybe you can refer to as akin to the Maratha Confederacy, right? I mean, when the Marathas empire was there, they were actually a conjunction of multiple states who in turn reported to the Chhatrapati, something like that. So they were completely decentralized. And then decentralized units were called cantons, and they didn't have a central state till 1848. So only in 1848, where you had the republic, the Central Federal Republic of Switzerland being established under those cantons. You have, I'll come to that also in some time. So when that happened, interestingly, only then did they start thinking about a railway network. So Switzerland entered the railway game late, only around 1840s. That also we'll come to. But that gives you a fair idea. So these companies, private players were established, and then they were all profit making. And then in 1902, in the cantons, in conjunction with the Federal Republic, they joined together to form SBB because that's how they decide. I'll come to that also, how the decision making is done in terms of public policy in Switzerland. And then the other thing is, their total railway network is 5,200 kilometers. Only around 2/3 of it around 4,000 kilometers or so is with the SBB. The rest is still with private players, and you would be surprised to know that there are 74 private railway companies still in Switzerland. Okay, and then they are technically called private, but what happens is that the cantons are shareholders in those companies, and the cantons have a very big say in the level and frequency and density of service for the private players also, including the tourist railways. Anyway, and the other, so that's about the first map. And then if you look at the second map, it talks about the railway network, how it is split across only of the SBB railway network, if I'm not wrong, how it is split across the different regions in Switzerland. Interestingly, the Swiss generally tended to focus in the northeast corner, right? In our Vastu Shastra, northeast is Ishana Mula. I don't know why, but they also tended to focus on the northeast corner because, anyway, and they have given the reason also for it. They have mentioned that these are the most heavily populated cities. They first focused on, so you can see the cities over here in the northeast. So you have Koblenz, you have Winterthur, which is an industrial town, and you have a couple of other, and then of course you have Zurich. So they focused on the northeast side first, and then they came to the other parts of the country, and then they started constructing the railways in other parts of the country. Anyway, moving on. We covered about SBB. Now this map actually talks about the private railway companies which are still there. And then you can see that they are divided into the western region and the eastern region. So these are the private railway players in the western region. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, most of these private railway players, they still have the cantons of Switzerland as their major shareholders. And as a result, the cantons have a very big say in terms of the frequency, the density of service, the future investments, the funding, and in case there are any deficits which they face, the funding for expansion. So it's technically quasi-government owned. However, but Swiss adopting this decentralized to centralized approach, there are at least around 2 or 3 railway companies which are completely private as well. So that combination also exists. Moving on. So as I mentioned, this is the private railway companies in the eastern side. And of course, the most famous is this RHB, as it is called. It's called Ratische Bahn, also known in English as the Rhaetian Railway. This is one of the largest meter gauge private railway companies in Switzerland. And they offer 2 kinds of services. One is historic and tourist. The other one is commercial, and they run through the individual cities as well. And then, of course, the other major player here is SOB. And I'm sorry, I forget the expansion of it because, as you mentioned, I had to do some research while I was doing it and I fell in love with the railway network. But anyway, so this is the short summary of the plan. We'll cover a little bit more about it in subsequent slides. We'll touch upon it in subsequent slides. Moving on. All right. Statistics. So I said it's a decentralized, centralized approach. So you can see here, that's why I mentioned private with public guidance. That has always been the philosophy of conducting a railway in Switzerland. And I think this has some lessons for countries like us because we have a very extensive railway network. We have a very dense network, and ours is having a high amount of patronage. So rather than completely giving it to the private players and then at the risk of having a US model, which resulted in dismantling their entire railway network, which is an example not to follow. I would say US is an example not to follow. This is probably an example that we have to follow in terms of public policy. And again, it is a complete coincidence that our railway minister, it's interesting that our railway minister is currently in Switzerland on the eve of the Davos World Economic Forum. And then there are some news articles coming up that they are going to sign an MOU and learn some practices from them. This was fortuitous. This was completely coincidental. Of course, none of us had any I don't know how that happened at the same time, but seriously, when I was doing research on this, I could see that a lot of lessons that we can learn from them. Anyway, so as I mentioned, the length of the railway network is just 5,323 kilometers, and SBB has around 4,800 kilometers of that, maybe a little less. I just took a rough estimate. And then these guys here, these are the largest of the 74 private companies. So BLS is again legendary in its own way. It's the Bern-Lotsburg-Simplon Railway, which operates the Simplon Tunnel. And we'll talk about the tunnels also, because these guys have been doing that Kaizen, continuous investment, reinvestment in the railway. You know the Gotthard-based tunnel, which is operated by the SBB, which is the longest railway tunnel in the world, around 47 kilometers, if I'm not wrong. However, that's just one in a big series of base tunnels which they have invested. It's not just the Gotthard base tunnel. They also have the Simplon base tunnel, which is another tunnel which they have constructed, and also the Serovieri tunnel. Again, I may get the names wrong, but that's another tunnel which we will cover in current and future investments in part 2. Anyway, these guys are the biggest of the private companies. BLS, Bern-Lotsburg-Simplon, is 436 kilometers. That's in standard gauge. The Ratische-Bahn, that is 385 kilometers. That's meter gauge network. And then MGB is 144 kilometers. That's again meter gauge. The total length of all the meter gauge and narrow gauge networks in Switzerland is 1,440 kilometers. I call this, I mean, we often hear of in the UK, there was the Battle of the Gauges, where Sir Isambard Kingdom Brunel had the broad gauge for GWR, and then he fought with the parliamentarians just to prove that his broad gauge was superior, which it was. It had higher speeds and all that, but there were more standard gauge network compared to broad gauge, and then they had to adopt the standard gauge there. But Switzerland, interestingly, that once or twice that topic came, albeit a bit softly, but the people vetoed it out. That was the interesting stuff, because they wanted the union of gauges. They didn't want the battle of gauges. So that's what happened in Switzerland. So they wanted to keep the meter and the narrow gauge network as it is. I think this also has lesson, not just for tourism, but also for commercial operations. I think this has some ramifications for our mountain railway network as well, to maintain and keep the gauges that we have. And then the other thing is their public policy, whatever they have, both at the federal government level and also at the canton level, is always skewed in favor of railway. They penalize the road transport. So that's why what happens is they encourage not just travel by trams, but also they have this system called post buses. So what happens is the buses will always be interconnected with the rail. So the railway is the hub. And then in case you need to travel to other places within by road, the roads will be connected to the railway station. So they are very impressive in the way they know. And it's not just applicable for road transport. They also interconnect their shipping with the railway network. Because some of these railway companies, they operate the buses as well, which is linked to the railway stations, the hub. And they also operate steamers and small ships, because you have a lot of lakes which are used for tourism purposes. And these are also linked to the nearest docks, which are closest to the railway station. So they have this great interconnectivity. And then the public policy favors transportation of goods, freight by rail. So as a result, you can see here that Transalpine freight, the market share by railway as of 2022 is 74%, which is again a very impressive number. And then the Swiss are one of the most heaviest users of railway transport in the world. So the average distance traveled is around 2,500 kilometers per person per year. So, and even during COVID, it was around 1,000, which is far higher than any other country. So, oh, I'm sorry. Okay, and then this is again about public policy, which we'll come to in some time. And this picture you see here is in the Swiss Federal Palace. So initially, Switzerland, when Switzerland was formed, you had only 22 cantons. Currently, you have 26. Just like how we also create new states like Telangana, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Uttarakhand, like that, they also split the existing canton into more parts, and then they have 26 cantons now. So this was at that time. They had 22, and then their heraldry and coat of arms of each of the cantons. Then I talked about the decentralized approach, right? The decentralization goes one level further. Below the canton, you have something called the Gemeinde. So Gemeinde is like a mini state, right? And these are directly represented by the individual cities and villages and towns. And they have a huge say in how the railways operate. And some of these Gemindes are also shareholders in the independent railway companies, and they also provide financial assistance for the railways in case there is any deficit. Right, that's a very interesting point. So you have the Swiss Federal Railway, the federal government, which operates SBB. Then you have the cantons, and each canton has a say in some of the railway companies, including the main railway company, which is SBB. And below the canton, you have the Gemeinde, so which they also help in running providing funds, or in terms of they are liaised for decision making in the operation of the railway. Anyway, and the Swiss wanted the narrow gauge. I mean, they grouped the meter gauge and the narrow gauge. Their narrow gauge is 750 millimeters. That's one kind of narrow gauge. The second kind of narrow gauge they have is 800 millimeters. So you have 1000 millimeters, 800 millimeters, 750 millimeter gauge. So these three are their narrow gauge network, and they wanted it because they wanted it for tourism, and they wanted it for building their mountain railway lines, including the rack railway network. Okay. And then how public policy impacted railway construction. You can see that there were a few Swiss routes which use electrification from their inception. They didn't even go for steam. For instance, an example which they give is the Bern-Lochberg-Simplon's main line from Spiez to Brig. In 1913, they constructed this main line, and this used electrification from the start. In 1913, they didn't want to go for steam then. Why they did all these things? Simple. It's all about economics and geopolitics. They don't have coal fields. And then what they realized during the eve of around that First World War period, the coal prices increased before, in the run up to the First World War and afterwards. And they found out that it was difficult and expensive to import coal. So therefore they thought, now that this electrification thingy, which was the later, that was the internet of its day. Electrification was the like, just you have the software companies now. That was the no, not even software. Now you have AI as the buzzword. Electrification was the AI of its day. So they said they had many alpine rivers, and that was suited for generating hydroelectric power. So now what they did, now this is a complex interplay between one industry, which is the railway, and other industries. So they established a lot of industrial towns across multiple cantons, Winterthur being one of them, and they set up heavy industrial plants for which made turbines and generators and other electrical equipment. What case in point is Brown Boveri and Company, which later became Asia Brown Boveri, ABB, which was till recently the largest employer in Switzerland. It is now currently owned by Hitachi because Asia had sold it to Hitachi, but the plants are still there and they still make electrical equipment. It's still one of the largest employers in Switzerland. So this industrial cluster developed buoyed by this industry, triggered by the railway. So that's another thing which is there. Okay, and then the Swiss standard of electrification is 15 kilovolt, 16 2/3 hertz. They don't use our 25 kilovolt cycle, which we use. They use the 15 kilovolt, 16 2/3 hertz. That's the standard Swiss railway electric cycle, the network that they use. And then, of course, I already said by 1938, they had electrified majority of their main line. And then because they embarked on full-scale electrification from 1919, by 1920, they had electrified 1,650 kilometers. And by 1938, they had completely electrified their main line. And only bits and pieces were pending, which they had electrified by 1960s. And interestingly, the Swiss, they didn't scrap their steam locomotives as soon as electrification went in full swing. So they had, again, this is again about public policy. What the Swiss did, they had this concept of holding steam locomotives in reserve. In other words, I'll come to the total steam loco and that numbers in one of the slides at the end. They kept around 150 to 170 steam locomotives in reserve, even after they had almost electrified 80 to 90% of their network. And apart from keeping this as an emergency motive power, it also ensured that some of them were also preserved for us, for crazy people like us. So they were also able to preserve it because they had some in reserve. But of course, the number preserved is, I mean, it's not as high as the number which they kept in. The number preserved is not as high as what they kept in reserve, but nevertheless, it directly helped in the railway preservation, the steam locomotive preservation as well. Anyway, moving on. All right. The first trains in Switzerland for such an impressive country which did a lot of good decisions in public policy. The origins of railway in Switzerland is a bit dubious, right? Because the first train on Swiss territory was in 1844 when the Swiss Federation itself, that's why I said it's a confederation, the Swiss Federation itself was not formed. So the first train on Swiss territory was hence a French train. So what happened was there was this French company called Chemin de Fer de Strasbourg, the Strasbourg Railway Company, which wanted to extend its line to Basel, Basel being a huge financial and banking town even then. So they wanted to extend their line to Basel in Switzerland, and that's why they constructed a line and they built their first railway network at Basel. In French, Basel is called Bale, B-A-L-E. And this caused a lot of alarm bells. I mean, of course, they had to give permission, but it caused a lot of alarm bells in Switzerland because they didn't want a French equipment and a French railway in Swiss territory. And see what they did for that. The Swiss are very unique in this also. So this, what you can see here, this is the fortress of the town of Basel. Okay, that's the fort, the city walls and the city fort of the town of Basel in the 1840s. This is the entrance. So they told the French, you are welcome to build a terminus in Basel. We give permission because we are interested in this new technology. We want to see how it works and what will be its impact. But it has to be very close to the city walls and close to the fortress for security reasons. Again, typically Germanic behavior, typical Swiss behavior, again, very conservative. So, and this is one of the reasons why Swiss are very humble and down to earth. So you can't get to know. I mean, just like how Americans like to beat about what they have achieved, the Swiss don't do that. But their locomotives, because of the fact that they were very conservative and the approach they had adopted, were very reliable. So they were also used for, especially during the interwar periods and after the First World War and the Second World War, some of the Swiss locomotives were so reliable and available. They were used in the French as well as in the German railway network also. And as we can see, the one of the companies which we imported from during the British time, in addition to, I mean, when we want to diversify from British suppliers, we used German and we also use Swiss. So this could be one of the reasons because they are very hardy locomotives. But anyway, coming back to this, they said you build a terminus close to the city walls. It has to be close to the fort and it should have sufficient security. And this will be the Basel terminus of the French line. Okay. They built it close to the wall and they kept the entire station with all its tracks close to the wall with appropriate security apparatus. So that's what they did. And this is a painting by Friedrich Mali in 1847. So this is present in the Swiss National Library. Why? Because unfortunately, the Swiss didn't protect this first railway, which was, I mean, there's nothing of this remains now, but more on that later. See, and this is another how the trains used to go. So when the French came, so this was the French railway, they had to cross this bridge. You have the city gates and the city walls. They have to get the approval from the sentries, go there, and the station was just inside the city wall. And this is from the Swiss National Archives from Basel, from the Basel Canton, Start Archive. So yeah, that's the thing. And when they actually welcome the first train, you have the Swiss intelligentsia and the Swiss people here welcoming the French train. So you can see here, right? So the fort and the wall and the train coming in, the station is immediately closed. And this was incidentally, this illustration was done, it was not done by the Swiss, it was done by the French. La Illustre in Paris. So moving on. All right. Now this is interesting. Now, after they saw the impact of the railway, I'm sorry. So after they saw the impact of the railway, the Swiss wanted to construct a completely Swiss railway network. So the seeds for this was laid in 1847. As you know, 1848, the Swiss Confederation was formed. So I think the talks were progressing in parallel to have a Swiss-wide network with the support of the Confederation and also the cantons. So what they did in 9th August, again August, our Independence Day, 15th August, the first completely Swadeshi Swiss train was in 9th August, 1847. So again, look, 100 years before, exactly 1947, 1847, again August. 9th August 1847, you can see that the first exclusively Swiss train ran. And this was done by a company called, which became one of the predecessor companies to SBB. It was called Schweizerische Nordbahn, meaning the Swiss Northern Railway, which became Schweizerische Nordostbahn, which is Swiss Northwestern Railway, and then that became SBB. The first line was actually between Zurich to Baden. It started from Zurich and then it went to Baden in Germany. Again, we are talking about the influence of railway on culture, arts. It also influenced the food because the Swiss were great fans of a bun, a pastry made in Baden, which was influenced by the Spaniards. It was called as a Spanish bun or the Spanish brottli. And then this railway enabled quick transportation and transportation at scale of the Spanish buns from Baden to Zurich, and it encouraged its consumption. So that's why this Schweizerische Nordbahn actually became known as Spanish Brottli Bahn, meaning the Spanish Bun Railway, or Spanish. That's what it was called, as people still call it that. Anyway, and this is the first exclusively Swiss locomotive, and this was called the Limmat. So you see, it's a 420 steam locomotive. In Swiss terms, I think it has 3 axles and 1 axle is driven, so it will be called 1/3 in the Swiss parlance. So this Limmat was built by a Swiss company called Maschinenfabrik Esslingen, ME. And then, of course, it was later scrapped, destroyed, and on the 100th anniversary of the first Swiss railway, SLM, our famous SLM, the Swiss Locomotive Maschinenfabrik, they built a replica, and that replica is still in working order. And that's the replica immediately after its construction in this builder's plate. This is the builder's plate photograph. You can see the SLM Winterthur logo here. So this was built exactly 100 year for the 100-year anniversary, and then it's still in working condition. Now, an interesting thing happened on this opening of the first line. Now, who do you think was the train driver of the first railway line exclusively done in Switzerland? You can see this gentleman over here, Nicholas Riggenbach. We know his inventions. We'll come to his invention shortly. But this guy was the train driver for this train, for the first exclusively Swiss train from Zurich to Baden. So Nicholas Riggenbach, he was an engineer with somehow including with SLM, but he wanted to drive the train and just to see how the thing actually drove, what he designed, how it drove. He wanted to see. Yes, I got it now. This guy was with the Maschinenfabrik Esslingen before moving to SLM. And then he wanted to see how the machine that he designed and created actually ran on the track. So he drove the first train. And as you know, Riggenbach, he was also employed for solutions for the mountain railways in Switzerland. He designed the Riggenbach rack system, and which is used in many railway companies, including in India. I think ours is also the Riggenbach rack, if I'm not wrong, in Nilgiri, but I need to confirm that. But some people say it's the ABT rack, but anyway, we'll come to that in some time. Riggenbach is credited with 2 inventions. One, of course, the rack, which bears his name, the rack system. He was also the inventor of the counter pressure brake. So by looking at how the steam locomotive drove and the braking systems of early steam locomotives, he thought, why should you just have a metallic block or a wooden block on the flange? Why don't we reverse the steam flow and use the reversal force to slow down the steam? It's the precursor to the dynamic braking system, right? This was the first example of the dynamic braking system. It reversed the steam flow in the cylinders, and he came up with the counter pressure steam brake. which is still used in our Class X steam locomotive in the Nilgiri Mountain Railway, because that was done by SLM, right? So that's an interesting twist here. I have a very short video of this train running. I mean, I won't play it for the full time in the interest of time, but I'll just show you how it works and what the people. So I'll just pause there. So you can see there are two steam locomotives. The one is the first steam locomotive replica, which is Limat. The second one is called Genf. So that was built, that is the oldest original steam locomotive in operation in Switzerland. It was built sometime in the 1850s by the SEB, which was one of the other predecessor companies of SBB. And that's why you can see it has that early steam locomotive look. You have a very open cab. I think it had 3 axles, 3x5, if I'm not wrong. But anyway, I would cover Genf in detail in the second part. So this is the Genf, the second locomotive, which is an original, by the original maintained the same boiler. So it's unique in that respect. One of the oldest operating steam locomotives in Switzerland. Anyway, so yeah, it's the Gen 5. I remember now it's E2x5, 2 axles powered out of 5 in total. Yeah, right. Moving on. All right. Now, since we covered about Riggenbach, we'll also cover a little bit about the rack systems. So the first kind of rack system used is, of course, the Riggenbach rack. And so this is a structure out of it. It's a very simple structure with a ladder frame and then a cog on top. And then one of the examples of the Riggenbach rack is given here. This is one of the private railways, the Wegner Alp Bahn, which runs between Lauter, Brunnen, and Grindelwald. And then this mountain is a very famous mountain. It's Mount Eiger in the background. And then it uses a ladder rack. It's formed of steel plates. And then it's connected by a round or a square rods at regular intervals. This was considered to be a bit complex and expensive to build. As you know, when you have turnouts or when you have lines branching out, this would be difficult to construct. So that's one of the problems they had with the Riggenbach rack. All right, this thing is interesting. See, this is called as a Locher rack system. And this is the steepest mountain railway anywhere in the world. The grades are 48%, 1 in 2. That's the grade. And to operate this, they use steam locomotive. As you can see here, this has a horizontal boiler. So this is the boiler of the steam locomotive. It's horizontal. And they kept the individual compartments at parallel to the axis so that the people and the driver won't feel any discomfort. So it's called a Locher rack. And this was the only rack which was suitable for heavy, very, very steep grades, like 1 in 2 and 47% grades. And this rack is still in operation, but with an electric locomotive. This railway is still in operation, very popular. It's called the Pilatus Bahn, PB. It's the steepest railway in the world. And this is one of the steam locomotives which was used over there. And this is how the Pilatus Bahn rack system was. So what Locher did, Locher was operating for a person called ABT, which is again, some people call this an alternate biting system. No, he is actually a person. And he was an engineer who developed another rack system, which I will cover shortly. But the ABT system and the Riggenbach system were limited to 1 in 4, 25% gradient. It couldn't go beyond that. So what Lozier thought, let me devise a rack which could be used for steeper grades. And that's why, see, unlike the other rack system where one cog is vertical on the ladder, you can see that the cogs here are sideways. This actually increased the adhesion to a exponentially to a very great extent. So it's all about horizontal teeth and horizontal pinions. So that was the idea he got. And he also thought that the other rack systems were prone to derailment. So to overcome that problem and increase the range of operation of the rack, he came up with this horizontal teeth and horizontal pinions. And this system, again, the transfer table, the turnouts, the lines branching out, it's a nightmare to build for any engineer. So it was very expensive. But you still have a few railway systems using this in Switzerland. Next, the ABT rack. So this was designed by Karl Roman Abt. So he was again a Swiss locomotive engineer. They all worked for one of the Swiss engineering firms. He worked as an apprentice for Riggenbach. In the Riggenbach works at Alton in Switzerland. And then he followed his own civil engineering company. And then he wanted to improve the Riggenbach system. So he wanted to make it a bit more standardized, less expensive to mold, fabricate, and build. So he came up with a very simple rack system. See, a simple cog on a very simple system. So it was easier to fabricate and build. Vertical, but easier to fabricate. But the level of adhesion was considered to be a little less, a little inferior compared to the Riggenbach system. And but that was slightly offset with the use of multiple bars with multiple offset teeth. And I'm just quickly skimming through this. But yes, but what happened here was this had a greater wear and tear because the level of adhesion was slightly less. The wear and tear was higher than the Riggenbach system, but it was cheap to build. So, and what you see here is one of the current electrical equipment on this railway, the Rocher, the Nye railway, and the electric MU, what you see here is called the MER 301 unit. So that uses this ABT rack. You can see the track and also the rack system over here. So let's say this is an 800 millimeter narrow gauge line in Switzerland. Okay, moving on. The last rack. I mean, I initially thought there were 3 rack systems in Switzerland, but when I did my research, I found out there are not 3 but 4. So this is the other one. This is the Strub rack system. So, and this is how it is. The Strub rack was also used in France. This is one of the railways in France. Very recent railway, by the way. They recently built this railway, the Panoramic de Dome. So this uses the Strub rack system. This was invented by an engineer named Emil Strub. And then you see how it is, the flat bottom rail and rack teeth and all that. And this Strub rack system is used in the Jungfraubahn, which is a very famous, you have this Alpine Express, you have the Jungfrau Express. So the Jungfraubahn uses the Strub rack system. And Jungfraubahn is again a private railway which operates that mountainous region, very famous mountain region with the highest hotel in the Europe. So you have 2 railway cars here, JB 205 and 208, at one of the stations in the Jungfraubahn in 2015. So as you can see, they use this Strub rack. And again, this is again interestingly, the Jungfraubahn is a meter gauge network, and then it goes from the base, which is Klein Scheidegg, as it is called. That's the base station, and the peak, the apex, is of course Jungfrau Joch station, which is the highest station in Europe at 11,333 feet. So for that, they use this rack system. Moving on. All right, so just quickly skim through this because I also want some discussion about this. So you have 3 kinds of gauges. As I said, standard gauge is 3,400 kilometers, out of which only 2/3 belong to SBB. The rest are with private players. Meter gauge is 1,400 kilometers and narrow gauge is just 68 kilometers. So this is what I call as the union of the gauges. in Switzerland as opposed to Battle of the Gauges. So this is on the left bottom. This is one of the latest equipment which is used, very recently ordered and recently come into operation by the BLS, the Bern-Lochberg-Simplon Railway, which is called the Mika train set. That's the largest standard gauge railway in the private independent player. And then this is the narrow gauge steam railway, which still uses steam locomotives for regular operations for the narrow gauge line, which is Rotorbahn. And then this is the MOB meter gauge line. This is again a meter gauge line used for commercial operations across different towns and villages in Switzerland. And of course, bottom right, you see the Ratische Bahn. This is a very famous locomotive used by the Ratische Bahn. This is the meter gauge equivalent of their standard gauge workhorse. Their 4x4. They had the AE 4x4 and the GE 4x4, increasing orders of power and also subsequent classes. So 4 axles driven out of 4 Bobo locomotive. And they built a meter gauge version. For every standard gauge version, for the Ratische Bahn, they also used to build a meter gauge version for their commercial operation. That's another interesting thing about them. So moving on. Swiss steam. Okay, the state of Swiss steam. So we have only a couple more slides and I think we can close. So you can see here, SBB at one time had 1,559 steam locomotives. SBB itself, despite its extensive electrification. And then the independent railway networks, they had 403 steam locomotives. And this was considered to be the strategic reserve. In 1950s, they had 175. In 1960s, they had 148. There are the number preserved, the count varies. As far as the author, Martin Fischer, and other people in the Swiss Railway Society, they are of the view that the preserved and operational steam locomotives could be 40. But in my various stages, plinth locos and all that, it could be that entire 1950 number is what they are telling, 170. But again, I'm not sure about this number. But you still see a very significant heritage steam operations, very vibrant, because every private railway, the mountain railway, and of course, SBV itself has something called as the SBB Heritage Wing. So they not only have books, videos, media, archive, library, photographs, everything about their heritage operations, but they also run 2 kinds of stock. They run their heritage electric stock because since they electrified very early, they have some of their earliest electric locomotives still in operation, and they use it for heritage runs and also for charter trains. And they also run heritage steam stock. And the heritage steam fleet consists of the steam fleet of SBB and our predecessor companies. For instance, this thing, I think it belonged to the Jura Simplon, JS Railway. This was again it's a 460 locomotive. I think in their parlance, it was called 3x5. It was called A 3x5. And interestingly, since we are talking about steam, you can see the evolution of the steam locomotive in the Swiss network. So they were the earliest to experiment with the Husinger version of Walschatz's valve gear. So they were very fond, like the Germanic railways, they were very fond of the Husinger version, which was almost the same as Walschatz's valve gear, but slightly different. It was independently invented by von Husinger. And this locomotive used that, as were many other steam locomotives in Switzerland, use that valve gear. They also experimented with joy gear, which I'll come to shortly. And this was a compound steam locomotive. I think this was a 2-cylinder compound steam locomotive. And it still does heritage lines even across the Gotthard Pass and the Gotthard Tunnel. It still does heritage lines. Interestingly, without the support of any diesel or electric traction. Generally, what they do is many of the railway companies, when they run steam locos, they will have this diesel and electric as a standby. But what the Swiss do is they run their steam locomotive independently. I don't know, that shows the level of maintenance and the trust they have in the equipment, I guess. But yeah, they run it independently. And then this is a meter gauge version of 4x5 steam loco. This meter gauge 4x5 was built for the Ratische Bahn. So this is also in Ratische Bahn also runs this in regular operation. They have these heritage and tourist specials which runs this. So this is by SBB. This is by one of the private railways. So just wanted to show that. And since I didn't have time to cover all the steam locos, I wanted to cover at least one loco from each railway or each era, the predecessor company and each railway, but that is for part 2. But I wanted to cover this particular steam loco because it's very significant in the history of Switzerland. Because this was the last operation, this SBBC 5x6. Basically, it's a 210 locomotive. This was the most powerful steam locomotive built in Switzerland. It had 1,440 horsepower on the drawbar. And then it was built by SLM and also by a conglomeration of other companies as well. And they built it across different stages. First couple, they built it as a saturated compound. They still experimented with saturated compounds even as late as 1920s. Saturated compound, it's a 4-cylinder loco. They built it as a compound locomotive, simple locomotive, and again a compound locomotive. So it was built in 3 classes. So they experimented with everything. The last compound being a superheated, steam locomotives. They have the superheating and then compounding to increase efficiency. So they use a Schmidt superheater and also compounding. So, and this steam locomotive, I think there are 2 examples which are preserved and in working order of this particular locomotive. This also had the honor of pulling the last steam train in Switzerland. The last steam train in 1968 was pulled by this locomotive, and it is still, there are 2 examples preserved, and both of them are running. And for 125 years of the Gotthard Bahn, this locomotive 5x6 along with that 705 which I showed earlier in the earlier slide, both of them were being used for a regular steam run for 125 years of their operation. These are all builder photo, their maintenance, some photographs I just took. And this was built by SLM. SLM also built mainline standard gauge steam locomotives. And this locomotive was also nicknamed the Elephant because, again, like the Indian elephant, we also have Indian Railway had this elephant as a logo. This was called the Elephant. I thought that was interesting because the operating crews loved this loco. It was considered, I showed a video of the earliest, the Limmat. What the passengers and the engineers felt was they were very smooth, even for being a steam locomotive. The way they built the loco, it was, apart from reliability, it was also known for smoothness of their running. Why? Because they had something called as their Helmholtz Winterthur axle. So since it's a 210, it's not a 4, the leading axle is not, it doesn't have 4 wheels. It doesn't have 2 axles. It has only 1. So what they did, they combined that leading axle with the leading driving axle, and then they used this Helmholtz Winterthur axle for stabilizing the run. And they also had back axle springs. So, and the French and the Germans were also very much impressed by this loco, that this was loaned to the French and the German railways, especially during the post-Second World War II and the interwar period and the post-Second World War II period. This SBB 5x6 was loaned, and you can see the drawings of this. SBB has a very extensive archive, which is something I think we should also learn from them. They are very, very detailed, and they have released their archival drawings and blueprints in stages, even to Wikimedia. So this is their archival drawings, the blueprint of SBB 5x6 in the background. Okay, now I'll quickly cover the numbers. I told that they are profitable. So this is the profit after tax of SBB. You can see from 2012 till 2019, they made roughly around 400, 450, 500 million profit, Swiss franc profit after tax. Because of the pandemic, they went into the red, but you can see that the level of losses reduced in 2022. And in the first half year of 2023, they made a profit of almost 100 million, 99 million Swiss franc in the first half of 2023. There were 2 unfortunate events which happened for SBB. So in 2022, there was a write-down of 131.5 million Swiss francs. So that was the reason for this loss. And in 2023, there was an accident in Gotthard-based tunnel because there was a derailment which happened. They are in the process of solving that derailment issue because a freight train derailed and a flange actually broke off from one of the freight cars, and then it completely damaged that entire base tunnel section of track. So what is happening now is all the trains are being routed through the old Gotthard tunnel and the old Gotthard pass. It's a very scenic route. It's still used for tourist lines, but after a long time, the commercial operations are being using that. So, and there may be some expenses related to that in 2023. And yes, the Swiss are also known for their punctuality. A 0.1 decrease in their punctuality levels causes a huge uproar in the Swiss local media. Again, the Swiss local media is also very much decentralized. You have two main channels which covers most of the content, and then you have regional channels and regional media, regional newspapers, and as well, which flows to the central media. So they pride themselves in their punctuality. This is the average punctuality, 95.8% for both freight and passenger. This is not just passenger. Both freight and passenger is 95.8%. And passenger levels would be around 99%. Trains arriving within 5 minutes of their scheduled time. So uh, they are somehow able to manage it. These are some facts and figures. They handle 1.6 million passengers per day, 180,000 net tons of freight traffic per day, 11,338 trains. I think this is, I don't know, I think some other older figure, I guess, but I'm not completely sure where this came from. But what I last saw was 95.8. Maybe this is, okay, this is arrival on time. On time is 92.5. Within 5 minutes is 95.8. Yeah, yeah. So that also they measure. If you look at their annual report, if you look at their charts, they slice and dice number of people entering station, number of people exiting stations, number of people who are catching their connecting trains on time. That's a metric which they have. They also have a number of people catching the connecting buses on time, reaching airport on time. Those things are there. I mean, and they take pride in that. So this is on time arrival is 92.5 for SPB. For BLS, it's even higher. BLS, it's I think it ranges between 96 to 98%. So yeah. This is a very interesting graph. So they also measure the passenger network across the different divisions which they have. You can see that there was a dip in COVID, and then everywhere after COVID, there is this J-shaped graph which shows a revival. So that's another thing which I thought was interesting. I showed you the results for SBB, which is the state operator, the largest. For one of the private railways, the Ratish Sheban, the meter gauge network, look at the results. They made an annual profit of 4.2 million CHF for 2022, and it has always been increasing. So, of course, there are challenges in terms of increase in personal costs and other operating costs, but they do try to run the railway as efficient as possible with public guidance, people guidance, as well as private efficiency. Both they do. So that's that. Thank you. That's all I had for today. So this is all about part one. So I also have a teaser for part two. So part two, this covers the workhorse. So this is that RE 6x6. So 222, 6 driven axles, Bobo loco. I wanted to cover a little bit about electric traction, other steam traction, the independent railways and their heritage thing. That's for another day. Thank you very much. Thanks for your time. I know, I mean, we took around an hour or so. Apologies. I thought you can cover
in
one.
Thank you very, very much. You know, I decided that when about 5 minutes are left, I would give you a warning that your time is almost over. But I was so absorbed in what you were saying that I totally forgot that so much time had passed. Therefore, thank you very much. It was a very absorbing talk. And I'm sure, let's say, a lot of information for almost everybody who was listening. Anyway, if there are any questions or any point anybody would like to make, you're welcome.
May I make one? Sanjay here.
Please go ahead.
Mani,
yes, sir.
Of following the Swiss pattern in India, when I was in position also, I argued very vehemently that the railway which are exclusively within the...
Is it just me or I lost my part? Lost Sanjay, sir. Hello, am I audible?
Please start. Could you stop
There's a
sharing
problem,
screen?
Mr. Mukherjee,
Yes, you are audible.
Issues involved.
We lost Sanjay actually.
Are you?
No, he's back.
Yeah, you're back, sir. Yeah.
But now another issue. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
You were telling you argued vehemently and then we lost. Yeah.
Are you able to hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, you can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, what I said was that initially there was some honeymooning with the freight railways to start with, PPP models and things like. Did not have the technical wherewithal, right? Now, now we can think of talking to certain progressive states at least who can take over these some lines and integrate them, like the RRTS, for example, in Delhi is connecting Delhi with the hinterland. Those states like Maharashtra, like West Bengal, like Tamil Nadu, and maybe Karnataka, who have the hinterland exclusively with them, can they start off with this kind of a thing so that gradually, this hub and spoke and the integrated transport system comes up in India?
Yes, sir. I mean, was that a question for me? I mean, I think you are far better placed to answer than me because being the expert on this. But I think, yes, your idea is actually good. If you look at, the example of the Swiss and then adopting the same solution where the entire interland is with us, adopting this PPP model. And yes, I think it would make definite sense, sir. Now that since our rail mantri is over there, I think if some of you can talk at the appropriate circles in the railway and then give your ideas or sessions, so that I think we have a good opportunity there.
Mani, I was just surprised that Indian Railway runs 13,000 trains and these guys run 11,000 trains.
Yeah.
They're smaller than the state of Maharashtra, right? It's a tiny country. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but the size and span of the trains you will have to understand. You see, there is a hub and spoke concept there. Every canton runs its trains, and then that does not mean that your total volume is so much.
Yeah. I don't know whether
there's a difference between the operating.
No, I don't know whether the Indian statistics also include, say, suburban sections like Mumbai, because they themselves must be running half those trains.
And that is true. That is true.
So,
yeah, they do.
Yeah. So
this figure 13,000 is for passenger trains only. I do not know if the Swiss figure is for passenger trains only or does it include freight trains?
correct. Right.
No, it will be passenger trains only, I suppose.
No, but that level of business exists. That is what we are saying. In India, even if we run double the numbers, they'll still go packed. So that's the way it is.
Yep.
Yeah.
But all these trains must
Anyway, it was wonderful.
national trains passing to Switzerland. Most of the trains are not only Swiss trains, they are international trains. Like Germany to Italy, Germany to Austria via Switzerland, things like that. So it's not just SBB. It's all the all the European consortium trains running.
Yeah, they have just given it as 11,338 trains on the network. So it includes all the trains, including Deutsche Bahn, SNCF, and other operators which use the SBB network. So they are 11,300, as you mentioned.
Another interesting point which I observed was if you have to change trains at a particular station, your compartment will halt exactly opposite the train which you are going to catch. So you just have to run across the platform, not the whole length of the train. That's the thing.
No, I suppose that kind of thing has started in India in the metro cases too. You see, that kind of a planning has started. At least in Calcutta, I know the east-west and the north-south wings, which one is on standard gauge, another is on broad gauge. That kind of a plan has come up in Calcutta. So ultimately, it will evolve. If that's what I'm saying, there are two, and rather one operator, but two systems. And if and we did start when I was working in Metro Railway in Calcutta. We had started with the Calcutta Metro, Calcutta State Transport Corporation, connecting buses from, say, Tollegan Station all the way to places like Behala and Garia. Now, these are all individual efforts, but a kind of a public policy has to come in that. And I'm sure the Rail Enthusiast Society is one organization which could put up a paper on this issue to the Railway Board and to the states and even on our website, which should start people talking about it with the public interface.
Sanjay sir, did you have a common ticket? Could I buy one ticket from on the metro and which
No,
will also
no,
work
no,
for the bus?
no. It was started for Mumbai, as you know. The BEST Western Railway initiative started, no doubt, but didn't work.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, even if without an integrated ticket, if it could start. But if you recall, way back in the 60s and 70s, when the Calcutta Tram company was there, there used to be integrated tickets. We just, went into oblivion, all these good things. It did work once upon a time.
Yeah, right, sir.
I think now it's being done because in Delhi Metro and the buses, they are doing it right now. And with the common mobility card, hopefully you will have a single card, which will probably you can use in all the buses and the metro systems, which are evolving in different cities.
No, that is what I'm saying. It is the state governments which have to be given more incentive, because they are the guys who have the power over various forms of transport. You see, if you keep the railway separate from the buses, the autos, the the water transport and everything, which is otherwise controlled by the state government, the public policy will not work. You cannot isolate this. So railways and metro is one of those things. If it starts with the state metros and the bus system as a herringbone, then I'm sure that is also the initial thing. And then the railways can join in too. I mean, I think RES needs to put in a paper for this to the Railway Board.
Why don't you write such a paper?
Why not? We'll do it. We'll do it. You see, our success with the Darjeeling Himalayan Railway and the access that we have now developed, same thing can happen with with other aspects. This is one of the issues which I think those of us who have worked with public policy in the railways should put our heads together. We'll do it, definitely. Thank you.
Thank you,
But
sir.
it was a very interesting it was wonderful to know this thing. I've traveled in the Swiss railways a number of times, therefore I could perhaps appreciate even more. Others must have done so too. Thanks a lot for this wonderful.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. And as I was telling Mr. Singh, I mean, my specialization is actually the Indian Railway and, of course, the railways in North America. That's what I always focused on. One problem which we have with these German-speaking countries is that material is not very readily available. And then even if we do have, despite the net and all that, we can translate and all that, the depth of material won't be there, like how we get for English-speaking countries like UK or US. So it took me some time, and I was actually helped by the Swiss Railway Society with whom I'm associated with, and then with whom I'm a member. They were very kind, and then they liaised me with a couple of authors and people who are subject matter experts on the Swiss Railway. And it was like a sort of translation of sorts. So I used the British gentleman as help to connect with the Swiss, because the Swiss, I think they are more familiar with the German, and then they are not very keen on talking in English and all that. So it had to go through the route of an interpreter in England, and then it had to go back to Switzerland and then getting information from there and all that. But yes, and I did ask for some speakers who can help on the art and literature in Switzerland, but I think the Swiss were not very keen to talk in English about it. That's the response I got from them, because they have a very extensive thing on impact of Swiss railways on their movies and art. They have museums for this, and then they have this archival records, all that. But that was a very interesting experience. I mean, to work with the Swiss Railway Society, who are very helpful, especially Mr. Martin Fischer, with whom I have to thank, because he kindly gave me access to his personal archive of the images that he took. And I have to thank him very much for giving me information on that and all that, because these photographs you won't get on the web, because these are his personal photographs. So yeah, I mean,
With all your
Sorry?
difficulties, you done an excellent job. If
Thank
you
you.
didn't have difficulties, then your talk would have probably been in 4 parts, not 2.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. No, but this is a new love for me. As soon as I started reading about and researching about the Swiss Railway, I fell in love with the Swiss Railway network. I don't think I can. I have to thank the RES I have to thank Mr. Mr. Singh and Mr. Anamitra for that earlier talk. And then some out of the blue, I just thought, well, let us focus on Switzerland. And then we ended up covering, extracting such golden nuggets of information from there. I mean, yeah.
Anyway, thank you very much, and we look forward to the second part of your talk.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Tentatively, we can fix it for April.
Yeah. But
Hello,
Mani, you are talking about the language problem. Switzerland has got 4 languages. There's French, German, Italian, and Romanish.
Okay.
Okay. So now the Italian people, when they travel to the German side, they would refuse to accept Italian as their language, the German people, the German Swiss. So they have language barriers there too. So that is why in Switzerland, like if you have a literature in French, the German speaking would just rubbish it off. Right?
Okay. That's a good one.
Right.
I've been to Switzerland only once, but not traveled on the railway. I went by a French train up to Geneva, and then with a friend, we drove around Lake Geneva. Now, if you have a look at the map of Switzerland, the southern part goes through Italy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, I had only a 1 entry visa into Switzerland. When we came back into Switzerland, they refused to let me enter. It was a hell of a problem, but they understood that it was not a mistake, really. It was just one of those things. So they let me in, but after quite a lot of difficulty.
But
No, but definitely. Sorry. Yeah.
Sorry. Now the problem is solved with the Schengen visa.
Yeah.
No, does Switzerland accept a Schengen visa? I think
Yeah,
it doesn't.
I think so.
No, Switzerland
they
doesn't.
do.
Of course
Because
they do.
I have traveled in Europe several times on Schengen visa.
No, in
Mani-
fact, when I had gone, this is about 20 years back, I'd gone on a Schengen visa, but Switzerland did not have a Schengen visa. For that, it was a
Really?
separate visa.
Yes, they joined later. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think currently it's on, Schengen, yes.
Mani, let me ask you one question.
Yes, sir.
Will you be making any presentation about the rack railways in North America?
Well, it can be considered at a future time if Mr. Singh and others are okay. Yeah. The Mount Washington Cog Railway, I think that's something which you have in mind, I guess. I mean that one of the inventors in Switzerland, I think they were consulted by, when I was researching for this, I came to know that they were consulted by the Mount Washington Cog Railway over there, and it is the same Swiss system. I think he was the consulting engineer for it. This is where the consulting engineers for that. So yeah, we can, sir. We can at some point in time. We can. Thank you for the listing this.
So it is
Thank
the
you very
app
much.
system. It is not the other system, right? Our OT railway is app system, right? ABT.
Yes, sir. I mean, there are
100%.
conflicting.
100%. It's we
yes.
don't have that ladder sort of a thing. We have 2 independent wheels on the same this thing. Yes, definitely.
Yeah, it looks like the ABT one. Yes.
Yeah. Great.
No, the rack definitely looks ABT.
Yeah.
Anyway, then, thank you very, very much. It was a most absorbing talk and very, very informative.
Thank you.
And we certainly look forward to the second part of your talk. As I said, tentatively in April, but we'll confirm.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Thank you very much, audience,
Thank
as
you.
well, for joining.
Thank you.
I think it was certainly a
And
very
it was
good
a nice talk.
Yeah, thank you, Viravji. Thank you. I mean, once we should cover on the French steam locomotives. That's something again which is very close to my heart, especially the locomotives built by André Chaplon. So we must discuss about that.
Yeah, that's close to my heart too.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Mani. It's excellent.
Thank you.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Stopping
Thank
the
you, everyone.
recording,
Thank you very
sir.
much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.